In our last class, we were introduced to the important subject of competence or qualifications necessary for following the path of self-enquiry, Atma Vichara. Who is fit for the Vichara Marga? The path is extremely subtle and very hard to follow, and success depends mainly upon the competence of the aspirant. We learned what those qualifications are over 12 verses from 16 to 27. Shankaracharya gave a long list of them. The sadhana chatushtaya, the 4 means of spiritual knowledge, including the shat sampatti, the 6 spiritual treasures: discrimination, renunciation, calmness, self-control, self-settledness, forbearance, concentration, faith, and finally, the longing for liberation. 9 qualities in all. These 9 qualities are what make one a spiritual aspirant. If these are not present, one may be a good student or a scholar of Advaita Vedanta, but one can't be called an aspirant. Now, all these 9 qualities, of all these 9 qualities, which ones are the most important? Of course, it goes without saying that Viveka, discrimination, is the first and foremost discipline. Because as we have already seen, without that, the other disciplines can't be practiced. If I'm not convinced of the unreality of this phenomenal world, then the question of giving it up and struggling to free myself from samsara does not arise. So Viveka is the most fundamental requirement. But if we leave that apart, what are the next? What are the next in order of importance? Obviously, Vairagya and Mumukshutva, renunciation and the longing for liberation. These 2 are the hallmarks of a real spiritual aspirant. So Vairagya and Mumukshutva are the 2 most vital spiritual qualities through which all other disciplines bear fruit. Without these 2, even the shat sampatti, the 6-fold treasures, become ultimately meaningless. Because the question is, why should I try to acquire these spiritual virtues if I don't have a spiritual goal? Nor will it be possible for me to practice those hard disciplines in the absence of a spiritual goal. The shat sampatti are meant for those who want to achieve moksha, the goal of liberation, through atma jnana, through self-realization. So, renunciation and longing for liberation. This is of the greatest importance in spiritual life, and they go hand in hand. Swami Vivekananda famously said, religion is realization. And he also said, with equal emphasis, he also said, religion is renunciation. Without renunciation, there can be no question of spirituality. And how much Sri Ramakrishna glorified longing for God, that we can see on every other page of his gospel. He called it Vyakulata, or intense yearning for God. Even the Upanishad says that the Atman reveals itself only to one who longs for it intensely. So this spiritual longing is an irrepressible urge, an urge that unifies the seeker's entire personality, which makes it one-pointed, which enables them to reach the goal of moksha. One must feel as if one's head were on fire. That is how the books describe this passion for truth, this longing for liberation, freedom. Without this emotional urge, without this intense one-pointedness, the would-be jnana yogi gets lost in a jungle of speculative philosophy, or has to remain satisfied with empty intellectual gymnastics. Here, Shankaracharya mentions 3 degrees of spiritual longing. So, we'll take up the first verse for today. Manda madhyama rupapi vairagyena shamadina prasadena guro seyam pravruddha suyate phalam. Manda madhyama rupapi vairagyena shamadina prasadena guro seyam pravruddha suyate phalam. Shankaracharya says, even though this longing for liberation may be present only in a weak or a moderate degree, it will grow intense through the practice of renunciation and of virtues like tranquility, and through the grace of the Guru, it will bear fruit. I repeat, even though this longing for liberation may be present only in a weak or moderate degree, it will grow intense through the practice of renunciation, vairagya, and the Shat Sampatti, virtues like tranquility. And through the grace of the Guru, it will bear fruit. So, mumukshutva is of 3 kinds: manda, madhyama, and pravruddha. Manda means mild, weak. Madhyama is moderate, middling. And pravruddha means intense or well developed. All of us here have felt some yearning for God, some longing for freedom of the soul. This we have all of us felt at some time or other. The feeling usually comes up when we are reading or hearing something spiritually inspiring, or when we are in the company of other spiritually minded people. This Shankaracharya classifies as manda, mild or weak mumukshutva. The feeling is mostly brought about by outside factors, and it vanishes when those factors are removed. When we are back in the everyday world, there is no trace of this mumukshutva. So it doesn't last very long, and it has no real effect on our spiritual life or on our spiritual practice. Of course, it is much better than not having the feeling at all, as in the case of out and out worldly people. Sri Ramakrishna used to say, the longing of the worldly people for God is momentary, like a drop of water on a red-hot frying pan. The water hisses and dries up in an instant. So, the attention of the worldly-minded people is directed to the enjoyment of worldly pleasure. So they don't feel any yearning or restlessness for God. Our case is far better than theirs, no doubt about it. But Shankaracharya says it is not enough. It is too weak. Then the next higher stage of mumukshutva is when we begin to seriously reflect upon what we have studied, what we have heard, what we have learnt about the teachings of Vedanta. If we have really done this kind of reflection, we will notice a definite change coming over us. As a result of constant, serious reflection, the sense of discrimination, viveka, will wake up from within, and that begins to transform our inner life. We will begin to see the defects inherent in all worldly things and enjoyments. This is what Viveka does for us. We will be shown again and again the ultimate futility of everything worldly. And the mind will gradually withdraw itself from all actions done with worldly aims. Why? Because we will realize more and more that such actions only strengthen our bondage to samsara. That is when we turn away from the world and towards moksha. There is a transformation in our life. This is the stage of vairagya, which is the result of viveka. But that is not all. This realization will not allow us to remain quiet. It will force us to find a good spiritual teacher. It will urge us to find this teacher and seek their guidance in the practice of self-enquiry. Enquiry into the reality, the truth of the Atman. All this means we have made considerable progress on the spiritual path. And the longing for liberation that we will come to feel at this second intermediate stage is stronger and more stable. And this Shankaracharya calls madhyama, moderate or middling mumukshutva. Then, as we keep advancing further and further, we keep growing stronger and stronger in vairagya and the shat sampattis. If you remember, the first of these 6 treasures is shama, serenity, tranquility of mind. The greater our renunciation, the deeper our calmness. Detachment and peace of mind are directly proportional to one another. If we can give up the world completely, we can be perfectly peaceful. So, when the mind becomes extremely dispassionate, it also becomes perfectly pure, peaceful. It becomes concentrated. And such a mind, Vedanta says, such a pure, concentrated mind can only have one desire, if it may be called a desire. And that is the burning desire for self-knowledge and liberation. This is what it means when the verse says, the longing for liberation will grow intense through the practice of renunciation and of virtues like tranquility. They are all very closely interrelated. At this stage, something wonderful is set to happen. All along, the spiritual teacher, the guru, has been quietly watching the disciples' progress in the background. Now he is satisfied with the disciples' fitness. Now he is sure that the disciple is ready for higher spiritual practice. And he is extremely glad about it. So, out of the fullness of his heart, he blesses the disciple. May you quickly cross over the ocean of samsara. May you quickly cross over the ocean of samsara. This is the grace of the Guru. The strength of the disciple's self-effort is supplemented by the Guru's grace. Mind you, the Guru is a Brahmanishta, firmly established in Brahman. To know Brahman is to become Brahman. The Upanishad says the knower of Brahman becomes Brahman. So it is Satchidananda itself that comes in the form of an illumined Guru. The grace of such a Guru is as good as the grace of God Himself. Even a mere wish that crosses the mind of such a Brahmanishta is bound to be fulfilled. It can't be otherwise. What to speak of a conscious blessing that such a soul utters out of the gladness of heart. It has immediate effect. And the effect is that the seeker, the disciple, now longs for moksha and moksha alone, to the exclusion of everything else. And the yearning becomes so intense that it is impossible to wait anymore. And the aspirant is ready to make any sacrifice in order to finally break free from the world. This is the final stage, which Shankaracharya calls pravruddha, intense or fully developed mumukshutva. This intensity is what brings final release to the soul. As Sri Ramakrishna used to say, the soul should pant for God. You know the story of the man who asked his Guru how God could be realized. The Guru says to him, "Come with me, I'll show you how you can realize God." Saying this, he takes the disciple to a lake and holds his head under the water. After a short time, he releases the disciple and asks him, "How did you feel?" "Oh, I was dying for a breath of air," the disciple says. Then the Guru says, when the soul longs and yearns for God like that, then you will know that you don't have to wait long for God's vision. Sri Ramakrishna says, the rosy color on the eastern horizon shows that the sun will soon rise. So, manda madhyama rupapi vairagyena shamadina prasadena guro seyam pravruddha suyate phalam. Even though this longing for liberation may be present only in a weak or moderate degree, it will grow intense through the practice of renunciation and of virtues like tranquility, and through the grace of the Guru, it will bear fruit. Now, the following two verses, 29 and 30, the following two verses once again highlight the importance and value of renunciation and longing. When these two are present, the other virtues come of themselves. But when they are absent, the other virtues are also absent. So Shankaracharya says, Vairagyancha mumukshutvam tivram yasyatu vidyate tasminneva arthavantasya phalavanta shamadayah. Vairagyancha mumukshutvam tivram yasyatu vidyate tasminneva arthavantasya phalavanta shamadayah. It is only in the case of a person whose renunciation, whose longing for freedom are intense, that the practice of tranquility and the other virtues are meaningful and become fruitful. First of all, what are these other virtues? We have heard them in our last class. The reference is to the sixfold spiritual treasure, Shat Sampatti. Shama, serenity of mind. Dhamma, control of the body and the senses. Uparati, preventing the sense organs. Once they are controlled, preventing the sense organs from drifting back to their objects. Then titiksha, forbearance. Samadhana, complete concentration. And shraddha, faith. These 6 spiritual virtues are in fact qualities of the soul, so to say. They only manifest themselves in an aspirant who is dispassionate, leidenschaftslos, who desires to be free. So, if we happen to come across an aspirant who exhibits these qualities, 6 qualities, Shat Sampatti, we can take it for granted that that aspirant already possesses vairagya and mumukshutva. In the same way, if we see an aspirant who is endowed with vairagya and mumukshutva, we can also infer from it that they must also have cultivated these 6 virtues. The point is, all these, the sadhana chatushtaya, the 4-fold means of knowledge, including the Shat Sampattis, the 6 spiritual treasures, 9 qualities altogether, as we saw in our last class. They're all interdependent, very closely interrelated. But what the verse wants to convey is something more than that. It is not enough for these virtues to manifest themselves in an aspirant. They must serve their ultimate purpose. What is that ultimate purpose? It is nothing but the attainment of moksha through jnana. Nothing less than that. This is the purpose which all these sadhana chatushtaya and the Shat Sampattis have to fulfill. For that, however, there has to be extreme renunciation, vairagya, and intense longing for liberation. Tivra vairagya and tivra mumukshutva. The word tivra means extreme or intense. We got an idea of the intensity of that longing from Sri Ramakrishna's parable, which we heard just now. The soul should pant, caution for freedom. So, how is extreme dispassion, vairagya described? In one of his minor compositions, Shankaracharya writes, extreme dispassion is when objects of sense pleasure arouse in the aspirant feelings of such extreme disgust or revulsion, ekil, abshay, as if they were a crow's excrement. Sorry, but this is what Shankaracharya has said. Extreme dispassion is when objects of sense pleasure arouse in the aspirant feelings of such extreme disgust or revulsion as if they were a crow's excrement. The crow itself is supposed to be a very unclean creature, filling its belly with nothing but filth. as if that is not enough. Well, let me leave it there. Shankaracharya says, when the aspirant is disgusted to the point of revulsion at the mere sight of objects of sense pleasure, that is extreme dispassion, Tivra Vairagya. But how does this extreme dispassion come about in the first place? How do we cultivate it? Because it is not natural to us. This is how. By repeatedly reminding ourselves of the defects, not only the defects, of the dangers that are inherent in those objects and their enjoyment. That is how to cultivate Tivra Vairagya. When the mind becomes convinced of this truth, that pleasure contains the seeds of future pain, that sense enjoyment invariably leads to suffering in the end, then the mind turns away from desire and towards freedom from desire. So we see that the group of 6 treasures, Shat Sampattis, occupies a place in between renunciation and the longing for liberation. They are the result of Vairagya, and in their turn they lead to Mumukshutva. But as the verse says, they only become meaningful, Arthavantaha. They become meaningful, that is, they become effective, they serve their purpose only when that dispassion is extreme. And it is only then that they also become fruitful, phalavanta. That is, they produce the fruit of intense mumukshutva, longing for liberation. So, Vairagyancha mumukshutvam tivram yasya tu vidyate tasminneva arthavantasya phalavanta shamadayah. It is only in a person whose renunciation, whose longing for freedom are intense, that the practice of tranquility and the other virtues are meaningful and become fruitful. Being spiritual aspirants ourselves, and that too followers of Vedanta, we have all these 9 qualities in us to a greater or lesser degree. But we need to intensify them. If we want to liberate ourselves from bondage in this life, then we have to detach ourselves completely from the world and become totally devoted to our spiritual ideal. In the next verse also, Shankaracharya reinforces the same idea, what is stated in an affirmative way in the previous 2 verses. That he again expresses in a negative way in this one. Here he says, Etayor mandata yatra viraktatva mumukshayoh marau salilavat tatra shamader bhanamatrata. Etayor mandata yatra viraktatva mumukshayoh marau salilavat tatra shamader bhanamatrata. Where renunciation and longing for liberation are weak, there tranquility and the other virtues are mere appearances, like the mirage in the desert. Shankaracharya is here using a familiar technique of teaching through positive and negative propositions, Aussagen. If you remember, he has already employed this method in verse 18. There, while introducing the sadhana chatushtaya, he said, when these four means of knowledge, when these four are present, devotion to Brahman will succeed, and when they are absent, it will fail. In the same manner, here he is saying, when vairagya and mumukshutva are intense, the shat sampattis, the 6 spiritual virtues, become fruitful. But when vairagya and mumukshutva are mild, the shat sampattis are fruitless. They are a mere appearance without any real substance, like water in a desert. In other words, they are unstable and they will disappear like a mirage on closer inspection. We may see somebody, we may have the idea that somebody is a very intense spiritual practitioner. But as Sri Ramakrishna said, if you watch such people by day and by night, chances are that sooner or later these appearances evaporate and they stand out in their true colors. Because without extreme dispassion and a burning desire for freedom, the practice of these virtues cannot be kept up. They can at any time be swept off by some strong attachment or weakness. Not only that, we heard last week that this group of 6 virtues forms the ethical foundation of spiritual life. When they are practiced, it disciplines the mind, gives the powers and tendencies of the mind a higher turn. They prepare the inner faculties for the cultivation of higher knowledge. But what does that indicate? It means that these virtues are not ends in themselves. They are only means to a higher end, the higher end of moksha. When they are cultivated and practiced for their own sake, assuming that such a thing can be done at all, if they are practiced for their own sake, they fail to produce the result they are actually intended for. They will not result in moksha. So all in all, this is what the verse is trying to say. Vairagya and mumukshutva are the 2 most vital spiritual qualities through which all other disciplines bear fruit. Without these 2, even the shat sampattis become ultimately meaningless. Because, as I said, it is so difficult for somebody to practice these hard disciplines without the spiritual goal. The shat sampattis are meant for those who want to achieve the goal of moksha through atma-jnana, liberation through self-knowledge. Others won't be able to practice it, not for long. So, etayor mandata yatra viraktatva mumukshayo marau salilavat tatra shamader bhanamatrata. Where renunciation and longing for liberation are weak, there tranquility and other virtues are a mere appearance, like the mirage in the desert. Now, after having studied these 3 verses, we can judge for ourselves how strong or how weak our discrimination, our dispassion for the world, our longing for liberation are. It is as if Shankaracharya has given us a measuring stick with which we can measure ourselves. The results may not be too encouraging, if we compare ourselves with the ideal truth seeker Shankaracharya has in mind. But we shouldn't let ourselves be disheartened, because he has also shown us how we can strengthen our Viveka, Vairagya and Mumukshutva. In addition to cultivating discrimination and dispassion, if we pay particular attention to the practice of the Shat Sampattis, the 6 spiritual virtues, tranquility, self-control, self-withdrawal, forbearance, concentration and faith. If we pay particular attention to these, Shankaracharya has assured us that the young plant of longing, mumukshutva, that is already in the heart, that will grow up into a big, strong tree and yield the fruit of moksha. That is what we need to do now. Anyhow, Shankaracharya has now all but concluded the subject of qualifications required for following the path of Atma Vichara. Qualifications required for following the path of self-enquiry. According to Advaita Vedanta, Atma Vichara is the only way to Jnana and Moksha. Atma Vichara means reasoning about, enquiring into, investigating into the real nature of the Atman. Who is competent for this path? Shankaracharya has discussed this question in detail from verse 16 to verse 27. And in the next 3 verses, 28 to 30, which we studied today, he has highlighted the primacy, forrang, the primacy of dispassion and the desire for liberation. Now, we have 3 different sets of qualifications, disciplines. The first set is of a general nature: intelligence, learning, knowledge. The student of Vedanta is expected to possess a sound knowledge of the scriptures, Vedas and Upanishads, plus a knowledge of other allied subjects like grammar, logic, the science of interpretation, and things like that. But equipped only with this, the student can become, at best, a good scholar and nothing more. But if they want to be spiritual aspirants, then they have to cultivate the next higher set of 4 specific qualifications for spiritual life. The sadhana chatushtaya, discrimination, dispassion, discipline, and a desire for liberation. These 4 spiritual qualifications, which of course include the Shat Sampattis, they bring the aspirant the fitness for inquiring after Brahman. When this fitness is acquired, the aspirant is ready for the next set of higher Vedantic disciplines: Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasana. Hearing, reflection, and meditation. Finally, when meditation, Nididhyasana, deepens into Samadhi, in the state of Samadhi, one comes to have the direct or the immediate knowledge of Brahman. That is the whole process, starting from book knowledge and culminating in direct personal experience. However, Shankaracharya's main focus until now has been on the practice of sadhana chatushtaya. the fourfold means of knowledge. Remember, this gives the aspirant not Brahmajnana directly, but Brahma Jignasa Yogyata, fitness to enquire after Brahman. So I repeat it once again. The sadhana chatushtaya, including the Shat Sampattis, they don't give us Brahmajnana directly. They only make us fit for enquiring after Brahman. After explaining all this, Shankaracharya now adds one final qualification and says it is the greatest of all. And what is that? Devotion, bhakti. Let it not surprise us, because he is going to define what bhakti is. He says, Moksha karana samagryam bhaktireva gariyasi swaswarupānusandhānam bhaktirityabhidīyate swātmatatvānusandhānam bhaktirityapare jaguhu. This verse has 3 lines. Moksha karana samagryam bhaktireva gariyasi swaswarupānusandhānam bhaktirityabhidīyate swātmatatvānusandhānam bhaktirityapare jaguhu. Among all means of liberation, devotion is supreme. Seeking to know one's real nature, this is said to be devotion. Among all means of liberation, devotion is supreme, but seeking to know one's real nature, this is said to be devotion. And then he adds, others say that inquiry into the truth of one's own self is devotion. In other words, devotion can be defined as the search for the reality of one's own Atman. Of course, this definition is from the Advaita standpoint. But still, what after all is bhakti? It is nothing but intense love and attachment. It is nothing but a profound dedication. But to what? To one's spiritual ideal. It means, bhakti means being sincerely and faithfully devoted to that ideal. Whether the ideal is personal or impersonal, that is entirely beside the point. It can be either. But devotion is devotion. That is Shankaracharya's point. We usually think that worshippers of the impersonal Brahman are emotionally dry people. It's a very wrong belief. It's not at all true. It is possible to be intensely devoted to an impersonal ideal. This we can see in the example starting from the rishis down to our modern day mystics like Ramana Maharshi. The devotion of the Advaitins lies in earnestly contemplating on the ever pure, ever awake, ever free Atman. Nitya Shuddha, Nitya Buddha, Nitya Mukta Atman within. That is their bhakti. The Advaitins only substitute Ishvara, the Supreme Lord, with the Atman, the indwelling self, that is all. However different that may appear, if we reflect on it, if we think about it with our background of Vedanta, we will see that there is no essential difference. What Dvaitins call Ishvara, Advaitins call Atman or Brahman. What Dvaitins call devotion, Advaitins call earnestness. What Dvaitins call union, Advaitins may call identity. What Dvaitins call immortality, for Advaitins it is liberation. And there is not much difference between them. Anyhow, the verse says, Moksha Karana Samagryam, of all the various aids and means to liberation, devotion is supreme. What are these aids and means? Everything that we discussed under the subject of qualifications. The general set, the specific set, and the higher set of spiritual disciplines. All that we heard about just now. Starting from intelligence, learning, knowledge, through the sadhana chatushtaya, including the shat sampattis, up to hearing and reflection, smarana and manana. 3 plus 9 plus 2. 14 disciplines in all, according to our list. All of them contribute to the achievement of moksha, but only indirectly. They are all said to be indirect means, indirect in the sense that they don't directly give rise to the knowledge of Brahman, but only make the aspirant fit for inquiring after Brahman. Starting from book knowledge up to reflection on the words of the Vedas and the teachings of the Guru. Then what is the direct means? After hearing and reflection, after Shravana and Manana, only one thing remains now. That is profound meditation, Nididhyasana. Not ordinary meditation, but profound meditation. Nididhyasana means, now I'll cite a definition. It is exact. Nididhyasana means the continuous dwelling of the mind. The continuous dwelling of the mind on a stream of ideas which are identical with the conception of the non-dual Brahman that the aspirant has in mind, to the exclusion of all foreign ideas. What are those foreign ideas? That one is the body or the senses or the mind or the ego. This is what Nididhyasana is. The continuous dwelling of the mind on a stream of ideas identical with the conception of the non-dual Brahman, to the exclusion of all foreign ideas such as the body, senses, mind and ego. It is like seeing the same scene. It is not yet samadhi. It is like seeing the one and same scene in about 100 frames of a movie film. The film is moving, but each and every frame in that film shows an identical scene. That is what Nididhyasana is. A stream of ideas identical with the conception of the non-dual Brahman, to the exclusion of all foreign ideas. No other scene. When this Nididhyasana is practiced without break for a long time, with intense love for the ideal, and with unflagging determination for its realization. See how beautifully these Advaita teachers have described these things in such detail and exactitude. When Nididhyasana is practiced without break for a long time with intense love for the ideal and with unflagging determination for its realization, then it leads to absorption in Brahman, Samadhi. If Nididhyasana is practiced in this way, the rishis and acharyas assure us that Brahmajnana will be realized directly and clearly. They say Brahmajnana will then become like a fruit on the palm of one's hand. That is their promise. If you practice Nididhyasana like this, you have Brahmajnana like a fruit in the palm of your hand. It is this profound meditation. This is what Shankaracharya, profound meditation practiced repeatedly with intense love and untiring determination until the ideal is realized. That is what Shankaracharya describes as Swaswarupa Anusandhana, investigation into the real nature of one's own self. That is bhakti, that is devotion to him, to Shankaracharya. So it amounts to saying that Nididhyasana, Swaswarupanusandhana and Bhakti are all synonymous. For Shankaracharya, Nididhyasana, Swaswarupanusandhana and Bhakti are all one and the same. And this Bhakti Reva Gariyasi, this devotion is the greatest. Because it is the immediate cause of jnana. Because it directly reveals one's true nature, which again is synonymous with moksha. What does it mean to realize oneself, one's true self? It only means that I am free, I become free from the body, mind, senses and ego, from the samsara. So jnana is synonymous with moksha. So that is why Advaita teachers regard this kind of bhakti as an antaranga sadhana, internal means for Atma Jnana. It's a very special word, antaranga sadhana, because it takes place deep within, inside the depths of one's being. Antaranga. Antaranga also means that which is essential to something. All others are bahiranga sadhanas, external or indirect means. Non-essentials compared to bhakti. When a seeker has this bhakti, that is to say, if they are able to practice Swaswarupanusandhana as described, then they don't need anything else. It is as good as having all the other qualifications and something more. That is Shankaracharya's lofty conception of bhakti. So, mokshakarana samagryam bhaktireva gariyasi swaswarupanusandhanam bhaktirityabhidhiyate swatmatattvanusandhanam bhaktirityapare jaguhu. Among all means of liberation, devotion is supreme. Seeking to know one's real nature, this is said to be devotion. Others say that enquiry into the truth of one's own self is devotion. So, that brings to an end our long discussion of the subject of qualifications for jnana and moksha. After the seeker has prepared oneself for Atma Vichara in this manner, then the next step is to approach a competent and compassionate guru who will help one realize one's ideal. This is the next step. So we will take up that subject in our next class. Thank you.